Mr. Speaker, sir, this morning I had a meeting with the President of the European Parliament and I presided at a meeting of the Cabinet. I also had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall be having further meetings later today.
Mr. Watson.
Speaker, does the Prime Minister recall saying recently that once people got used to the poll tax, they would wonder why they hadn't had it before? Mr. Speaker, is she so out of touch that she's unaware that in Scotland, where the poll tax has been in operation already for a year, it is as unwanted, as unaccepted, and for many families as unpayable as it's ever been?
Mr. Speaker, it is a very much fairer system than domestic... very much fairer...
Order!
...than domestic rates which preceded it. That was evident after the rating revaluation of domestic rates. It is patently unfair that under the previous system, only half of those who had votes with local authorities paid rates, and they were able to put the burden on all the rest. That is the primary unfairness. The second was that under the rating system, a single person in one house would pay the same rates as 4 or 5 people in the next door house. That too was patently unfair.
Mr. Robert McCrindle.
Mr. Speaker, has the Prime Minister noticed that both the London Business School and the National Institute for Economic and Social Research have been predicting over the last few days that the level of inflation is likely to have reduced to something around 4.5% by the turn of next year, and that mortgage rates are quite likely at that time to be under 10%. Does not the Prime Minister agree that at least as much significance should be placed on these medium-term predictions than on the understandable gloom occasioned by a month of admittedly bad trade figures?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
Order!
in view of my honourable friend's question, I'm doubly glad to see his return back to the House. It's very good. The rate of inflation and mortgage rates will be likely to fall if we stick to, for the coming months, a high rate of interest in order to cut the money supply and get down inflation. We must do that until the rate of inflation comes down, when other things will follow.
Mr. Neil Kinnock.
Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister tell us, does she have any plans to make an official visit to West Oxfordshire?
No, Mr. Speaker, I rather wish I did, to explain a thing or two.
Kinnock.
Mr. Speaker, I hope that that signifies a new readiness to listen on the part of the Prime Minister. Perhaps she should reconsider a decision and go to West Oxfordshire and meet the Conservative councillors who resigned the whip last night, explaining that they were resigning, and I quote them, in protest at the government's local government policies in general and those on housing and the community charge in particular. When her own councillors are blaming her government, isn't it clear that she's running out of both friends and excuses?
But not explanations of the facts, Mr. Speaker. No, the facts are...
Order!
Of course I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman is never perturbed by facts, but the facts are that the community charge of £412 is very high, and the situation is made worst of all by Oxfordshire County Council's Labour Liberals' gross overspending. Their standard spending assessment, agreed by government, was up by 12%, on which, of course, revenue grant is paid, but they're spending another £96 per adult above that increase in the SSA. And this accounts for the larger share of the increase in community charge.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I heard what the Prime Minister says. Does she realise that she's merely proving the point of the Tory councillor who resigned the whip last night, saying any tax that requires that much explanation must be bad?
Roof tax! Roof tax! Roof tax! Order!
Roof tax! Roof tax!
Order! Prime Minister.
But, Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman always prepares his supplementaries before he's heard the previous answer. The explanation...
Order!
The explanation was very simple and very brief. The Labour Oxfordshire County Council is increasing its spending by nearly 3 times the level of inflation. That is Labour Liberal policy. They wanted to put up the community charge as much as they could, hoping people would blame us instead of getting the blame on themselves where it should rest.
Mr. Patrick Cormack.
Is my right honourable friend aware that some 70 members on this side of the House have indicated that they feel that education expenditure should now be transferred to central government? And will my right honourable friend give further earnest consideration to the possible advantages of this move?
Mr. Speaker, first, I don't think it would be right for the administration of education to come to central government. I think that would be a retrograde step, and I prefer our own policy of grant maintained schools and putting budgets to the local schools so that parents and teachers have a bigger say and a bigger increase in the decision. That is better. But if education were to be transferred, of course a very goodly proportion of the revenue support grant and of the business rate would have to be transferred with it. Otherwise we should have a colossal increase in income tax, and that would suit no one. And if we were to do it without transferring that rate support grant, then I fear that the local authorities would only fill up the expenditure with other measures, and we should finish up both with a high community charge and high income tax, and that would be totally wrong.
Mr. John McFall. Number 2.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I refer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
McFall.
Of the popular uprising in West Oxfordshire by reformist elements in the Tory party. In view of the uprising in West Oxfordshire by reformist elements in the Tory party against unjust and unresponsive government, will the Prime Minister grant their request for perestroika as far as the poll tax is concerned? And will she, or did she, put a call through to the Foreign Secretary in Budapest this week to consult the communist old guard as to what to do in the present circumstances? And would she be kind enough? Would she be kind enough to indicate to the Foreign Secretary that it is now safer to go walkabouts in Budapest than it is in Berkshire or Oxfordshire?
The honourable gentleman had clearly studied his question a long time, but my honourable friends in West Oxfordshire are undoubtedly wishing that the Oxfordshire County Council was under good Tory control when they would have had a very much lower community charge. And had the spending been in line with the government's assumptions, its charge would have been £253, which is a great deal less, and largely because of the Oxfordshire County Council they are being charged.
Mr. James Couchman.
Number 3, sir.
Number 3.
I refer my honourable friend to the reply which I gave some minutes.
Mr. Couchman.
To my right honourable friend for that answer. Will my right honourable friend remind those of our honourable and right honourable friends opposed to the giving of British passports to certain key Hong Kong residents that Britain is obliged under the 1984 Joint Declaration to hand over Hong Kong in 1997 as a successful and prosperous place as it is now, and that the best way to ensure that is to give reassurance to the managerial, professional, administrative and entrepreneurial backbone of the colony.
I agree with my honourable friend that our duty to the people of Hong Kong is to, when the lease terminates in 1997, to hand over the colony of Hong Kong to China in a good, prosperous state. That will be most valuable to China and most likely to enable the people in the colony to continue with their present way of life as under the Anglo-Chinese agreement. For that, I believe my honourable friend is correct. We have a duty to give passports and British citizenship to two groups of people. Mr. Speaker,
Prime Minister.
to give British passports and citizenship to two groups of people, those who have been employed by the British administration in Hong Kong, who will stay loyal at their posts until the lease is terminated.
It's intolerable behaviour. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if I am asked questions, I would submit that I must be allowed to answer them. And the second group, absolutely vital to the prosperity of Hong Kong, are those entrepreneurs who built it up and who will keep it prosperous. For them to stay there is necessary to keep the prosperity, and I believe for them to stay there it is necessary to give them British citizenship. That is the reason.
Billy Ross!
Mr. Speaker, since the Prime Minister is giving some consideration today to local government finance, will she reflect today and over the weekend upon the fact that although local government bodies can manage to get quite a lot of central government help when major disasters such as the present flooding strikes, there is precious little for the individual who suffers in many cases most grievously from such natural disasters? And is it not long past the time when the government and this nation should consider setting up some sort of an emergency fund to help the individuals who do suffer such grievous damage in the interests of all the community, and we've had far too much of it this year already?
Mr. Speaker, well, I have 3 points to make in answer to the honourable gentleman's question. First, insofar as extra expenditure falls on the local authority, he is aware of the Belwyn rules which have been invoked in Wales and of other specific grants which may be available under different headings. Second, insofar as there is great personal loss through the loss of household possessions or damage to houses, one would expect that to be covered largely by insurance. And thirdly, there is, of course, in some places a disaster fund which meets exceptional difficulty and exceptional hardship on local people.
Mr. Roger King.
And my honourable friend, to reply which I gave some moments ago.
Roger King.
Speaker, would my right honourable friend join with me in welcoming the government's commitment to a good roads programme, as indicated in her right honourable friend's policy? Would she join with me in welcoming the order? Transport infrastructure is necessary for an economy like ours that is growing, and would she care to reflect upon the opposition spokesman for transport, the honourable member for Kingston upon Hull East, who said Labour government would abandon the entire programme?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it's vital for economic growth that we have good transport systems, and the roads reporter last week gave details of some 500 schemes which will both assist economic growth, I hope reduce the number of road accidents, which we're always anxious to do, and the many, many bypasses announced also will help to keep heavy lorries out of our villages and towns. It's a very good programme.
Mr. Dennis Canavan.
Right.
Well done. I defer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments
Mr. Dennis Canavan.
When is the Prime Minister going to face up to the fact that she and her hated poll tax are going to be defeated by a combination of people power in Scotland and deepening electoral unpopularity in England and Wales? If the Prime Minister is not concerned about losing the Mid-Staffordshire by-election and the resignation of 18 Tory councillors in Oxfordshire, will she at least listen to the increasing number of Tory MPs who are beginning to realise that by voting for the poll tax, they were like turkeys voting for an early Christmas?
Mr. Speaker, sir, perhaps the honourable gentleman will recall what happened in Scotland when we had the results of domestic revaluation of rates after only some 7 years, where of course it would be 17 years if it occurred in England. There was such an outcry that we were bound to take some action to alleviate the result, and also bound to agree to change from the domestic rating system. We changed to a community charge, which on the whole is working well in Scotland and is infinitely preferable to the Labour proposal of a roof tax based on capital values of houses, regardless of whether it's owner-occupiers or tenants who live within it, and also modified by reference to income tax, which would then, everyone's affairs would have to be revealed to the local authority. Labour proposals are the worst of all, and people would welcome the community charge.
May I?
Number six, sir.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Refer to an important matter which should have the support of the whole House, and that is the visit yesterday by my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, to Bradford, where she launched the Peoples in Cities programme and the allocation of a further 500 million for that problem. Would she in fact ask the organisers to consider how changes and radical changes have been made to Belfast, because I think that would be advantageous in considering what the Prime Minister has in mind for the inner cities here in Britain.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. Our Action in Cities programme, particularly that introduced in the last 2 years, and now the launch of the People in Cities, has been very successful. The inner cities have been transformed. Unemployment is falling rapidly. We have very close cooperation between industry and commerce and the cities, and I hope that more people will go to each city and see the transformation that has taken place and applaud it.
Business question, Mr. Bruce Crocott.